This is lesson 4 for Final Cut Pro 10, and this is a pretty hefty lesson. The topic is making the first edit, also called a rough cut. Just to be clear, we already know how to use Final Cut. What we're trying to do is dig a little bit deeper, see if we can add a few more shortcuts, a few more layers, a little bit more depth to our understanding of Final Cut Pro. That means some of this may be a refresher, and a lot of it might be new. That will be different from person to person. So just like we've done before, jot down a few notes, take a quiz. There's about 20 questions on this quiz, and this is a big chapter. It's about 100 pages in the book. Well, we're going to zip through it pretty fast. I'm going to come at you with a lot of different techniques, a lot of reminders, and a lot of fresh information. So let's get into it. This is the Final Cut Pro library that we will be dealing with today. The only difference between mine and yours is that mine says copy, yours doesn't. I wanted to make my screen look a little bit crazy here, so I've left a few odds and ends laying around in my interface. Because the first thing I want to do is go to Window, Workspaces, and choose Default, or I could hit Command 0. And what that does is pops you back to the standard Final Cut Pro interface setup. Well, the first thing we need is a project before we get started. I could click this New Project button. I could Control click or right click on my event, and I could select New Project, or I could go to the File menu and I could choose New Project, or I could hit Command N. That's what I'm talking about when I say taking our skills to new levels. Understand that there's 3 or 4 different ways to do all this stuff, and also take a moment to understand the organization here. The library is the biggest structure of Final Cut Pro. This holds everything audio and video related that you might have on your computer. Inside the library is an event. The event can be used differently as well, and then the project resides inside the event. So it's very important to remind yourself of that structure. Go ahead, make a new project, and then before we jump on, just check out this screen here. If we wanted to use custom settings, we could, but we don't need to worry about that because the automatic settings mean the very first clip that we drag and drop into our project, that will define the settings of the project. If we leave it set with this automatic settings, then Final Cut Pro will take that first file that we drag in and go from there. Let's give it a name, Daniel Cole Interview, and click OK or hit Enter. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get into the browser. That's this area of the interface where all of our media is stored, and I'm going to customize the look and appearance. I would like to see the waveforms, and I would like to drag this slider all the way over so that each clip shows up as just one single thumbnail. Once that's done, I want to click this drop-down menu and show favorites. I've marked a few favorites here, both in the interview and in some of this B-roll footage. So let's get in and put a few clips into the timeline. Just to keep it simple, we're going to grab these first 3 interview clips, and I can click the first one and shift click the third one. Now we're going to do that append edit. And the append edit means that all of these files are going to go to the end of the project. And there's 3 ways we can do that. We could drag and drop them there. That's kind of amateur level. We could click the button on the interface that performs the append edit, or we could hit the keyboard shortcut E. Now what we need to understand about the timeline in Final Cut Pro is it's called a magnetic timeline. And 2 magnets behave in one of 2 ways. Either they're attracted to each other or they repel from each other, or there's a repulsion between them. If we were to take this last clip and delete it and go back to here, drag it in, it's going to have this magnetic attraction to the end of the timeline. If we go and we want to drop it in between, then it's going to have that repulsion. It's going to push that other clip down the end of the timeline. So understanding the magnetic timeline as a literal magnet, attracting and repelling. Incidentally, this is called an insert edit, and if we wanted to do that from the browser, we would click the clip that we wanted to insert, we would position the playhead where we wanted to insert it, and we would either click the button, drag and drop, or use the keyboard shortcut W. Now I'm going to delete all of these clips from the timeline because I want to do something that's called storyboard editing. And with the storyboard edit, what you do is you literally click the pictures as though you're looking at a handwritten storyboard. And the order that you click those pictures is the order that Final Cut Pro will eventually put them into the timeline. So let's say I wanted to start with this clip, have this clip second, and this clip third. Well, I would click them in that order. Clip number 1, command click number 2, command click number 3, and then when I hit E to put them at the end of the timeline, they go in this order. And that's called storyboard editing, and can be really convenient if you're trying to put together a montage of clips one after the other and you want to look at the thumbnail image and pick from there. If you're looking at a longer clip, let me zoom in a little bit here on this first one. If you're looking at a longer clip like this, you would still use the command click to select different areas within the clip. And you could get into these individual areas and select them as well, and then E would put them in the timeline based on your selections that way. So that command click is important. So we've talked a little bit about the append edit. I'm going to go ahead and do a storyboard edit, clip 1, clip 2, and clip 3, and hit E to put that on to the end of the timeline using an append edit. I didn't preview any of those beforehand because I don't want to really spend a lot of time doing that. But you get the idea. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump into the primary storyline, and that's that dark bar that goes across the middle of the timeline. And we're going to start to refine those edits, first by using what's called a ripple edit. Let's zoom in to the last edit in the primary storyline by hitting Command plus to zoom in. And by default, your regular arrow tool will let you do what's called a ripple edit. Take a close look at the mouse pointer when you hover it over the edge of the clip, and you'll see the indication that you're about to do what's called a ripple edit. And there's a few different ways we could do this. I could click on the edit and I could drag it over. That's pretty convenient. Or I could use keyboard shortcuts, which would let me do this sometimes with a little bit more precision than what I could do as I click and drag. With the edit point selected like that, click, I can use the comma or the period to adjust left and right. That's tapping the comma key, and this is tapping the period key, and that moves it one frame at a time. If you look down, the comma and the period are also underneath those caret arrows, greater than or less than signs. If you want a little bit more precision as you drag, hold down the command key. That's more obvious the further out you are. If you find that your edit point is unnecessarily snapping to a playhead, for example, you can disable snapping on the fly by hitting the letter N as you're dragging. It also works the opposite way. If you do want it to snap against something, you can tap the letter N and it will snap to it. Now we're going to refine this edit a little bit so that Daniel delivers this primary storyline message without a lot of the sort of conversational things that you might add. I tend to do them a little bit here as well. The ums, the uhs, the and, ... that kind of thing. As we jump in here about 10 seconds in.
Is it great for yourself personally?
What we're going to do is use the blade tool to create a through edit on either side of right there. So there's a blade, click, and click. I'm going to hit Command plus to zoom in a little bit, and if you look carefully on those edit points, they look like dotted lines. That's letting us know that it's an edit point, yes, but the frame on one side and the other is connected, so there's really not an edit point. That's called a through edit. Essentially, you're slicing the edit, but you haven't actually made an edit. Does that make sense? Think about that for a second. Let's say you accidentally bladed in the middle of one of your words there. Well, you could undo that. Let's say you've been editing for a while and you had accidentally put a through edit in there and you wanted to remove it. Grab your regular arrow tool by either tapping the letter A or going to the drop down menu. You know what? Don't go to the drop down menu. That's some amateur stuff. And then you click on that edit. If you hit the backspace delete key, you've removed the through edit. So I'm going to go ahead and put the through edit back in there, and I'm going to hit A, and there's two different ways we can delete. We can either do a ripple delete where we hit the backspace button, and because of that magnetic timeline, those clips attract each other to one another and fill that gap. Or if I undo and instead used shift delete, That's called a lift delete. And what that does is it lifts the clip from the primary storyline, but it leaves a gap in its place. In this case, we definitely want the ripple delete, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit backspace. A handy shortcut that lets you preview and edit is Shift ? And if you look down at your keyboard, you'll see Shift and ? are right next to each other. And I always like to think of it, the question mark, as kind of a reminder of what does this edit look like? That's my question to myself. And what Shift ? does is it jumps back a couple of seconds in the timeline and it plays through your edit point. So I'm going to hit Shift ?
Not only is it great for yourself personally, but it also...
So that gives you a sample of what that edit is like. Don't worry about the fact that there's a jump cut. We're going to start to cover that with B-roll in a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and tidy up a little bit more of his message. And the first technique I'm going to show you is using the in and out points to mark a range. Remember, you can use J, K, and L as your playback controls. J goes in reverse. L goes forward. And K stops. I'm going to scoot back just a little bit. I'm going to mark an in point with the letter I in front of the word and I'm going to mark an out point with the letter O at the end of the word. Now I can hit delete and it removes that section of the audio and video. Another ripple delete, Shift ? will play it back.
I recommend anyone else be a part of it as well, because
now keep tidying up his interview. I've done a few more little cuts here, some trims, kind of try to make it sound like he's delivering this message in just the best way possible. One thing I did want to do was I wanted to give a little bit more space to this primary storyline. I could cut this whole thing together and make it really snappy, or I could let it breathe a little bit. And so at the end of this sentence right here,
the knowledge that they provide here.
At the knowledge they provide here, I want to put a gap clip in there. Command plus to zoom in. I use the up and down arrows to make sure I'm right on the edit point. And then I can go to Edit, Insert Generator, and Gap. But to be honest with you, I would never do that because I would hit Option W. I want to option to wedge that gap clip in between there. Option W. Now I can adjust the length of this using a ripple edit. Maybe make it about 1 second long. Listen back to that with Command ?
That they provide here. And when I went into college, I felt like...
Now that sounds quite a bit better. Now we're going to start to connect some B-roll. And the B-roll is just anything that provides a little bit of additional story content that might line up with the A-roll, with the interview, with the primary storyline. And for the B-roll, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit and I'm going to get into this section of the interview where he talks about using some of the information that he learns here with other people. As I listen to the interview,
it also gives you skills that you can then partner and use.
I'm going to go ahead and hit the space bar to stop. It talks about partnering with other people. I'm going to click this clip of him partnered with a couple of other people, and I'm going to hit Q to perform a connect edit. Now this one has some audio with it. I can click on this line across the clip and I can pull down the volume. That's -16 dB below where it initially was recorded. That may be okay, but I think I'm going to take it down just a little bit more. And then I can hit Command ? to see what that's going to look like.
Partner and use with other people in other situations. You can really take that and...
That's a good start for now. I can get into how to manipulate that a little bit differently later. I should point out on the connect edit, I hit Q, but I could have also hit the icon that does a connect edit, or I could have picked it up, dragged it, and dropped it there. Well, Q is definitely the easiest, and that's easy to remember because the Q has a little tail on it connected to it. So that can file away in your mind, and you can remember that as a shortcut for connect edit. If I go to connect another clip over an existing clip that's in that secondary lane above the primary storyline, Final Cut Pro intelligently goes ahead and stretches that up above so that it doesn't step on any of those other clips. I could adjust the volume down on this as well. And if I have snapping turned on, I'm going to pull over until those two clips line up side by side. I'm going to go ahead and add one more clip to the end of that cue one more time. And now I'm starting to get what's called a secondary storyline. Let's take a look at how we can group these three clips together into what's called a secondary storyline so they behave a little bit like the primary storyline. If you select all three of these clips, then you can right click or control click on those clips and you can create a storyline. The benefit of having that secondary storyline is now those clips are connected together and behave as one element as well. So you may have a section of your interview and you want to cut these three clips together over the top of that section, and you want them to be magnetically connected to that section of the interview. It's a convenient way to keep these clips grouped together in the same way they are in the primary storyline. These secondary storylines behave like the primary storylines because you can edit clips into them the same way as you can into the primary storyline, with one little catch. If I want to add another clip to the end of this secondary storyline, I click the gray bar across the top and I get a yellow highlight around the outside of it. So I could click another clip in the browser, and when I hit the letter E, it adds that clip on to the end of the secondary storyline because I had that selected first. A quick way to turn down the volume on any selected clip, by the way, is to click it and use Control- to turn down the volume. Obviously, that's a little bit easier to do small adjustments of just a few decibels. Let's take this clip out of here for just a second and drag it elsewhere in the timeline. Notice the connection point between this clip and the clip that's directly beneath it. Almost all the time, that's what we want Final Cut Pro to do. But let's say you wanted to reposition this clip and you did not want that clip that's above it to travel along with it. There's a convenient way to override that connection. You would click and hold the tilde key on your keyboard, also called the grave accent, and as you hold that, you'll notice I can reposition that other clip without disrupting that connection point. From here, we could continue to find some B-roll to add over the top of this. We could put some music below it, and traditionally music goes below this primary storyline. There's a couple things I want to point out that come from this chapter as well. The main audio meters show up right here in the middle of the interface. If you want to see those bigger, simply click on them and you'll see those expand over here. Keep your volume roughly below -6 dB. You don't want to go too far over that. Some of you want to push it all the way up to 0 a lot of times. Dialogue in particular needs to stay between -12 and -6, probably averaging around -12. Let's look at a couple more types of edits before we get out of this chapter. And those two types of edits are a slip edit and a roll edit. Let's say you sit down with Daniel and he says, hey, I'd really love to see this particular B-roll cut right here. Go ahead and show this tweet that shows up on the screen. So what a slip edit does is it locks in the inside and outside edit points, and it moves the content in between them. You can use the trim tool to get into some of these more advanced editing features. As you click in the middle of the clip, you see the left and right sides of the clip don't move at all, but the content in the middle does change. What we're seeing in the top of the screen on the left hand side is the new in point, and on the right hand side is the new out point. So that's called a slip edit. It's very convenient when you don't want to knock the timing of your project out of whack. The other type of edit that you can do that won't disrupt the timing of your project is called a roll edit. You can also do that with the trim tool. A roll edit takes a connecting in point and out point, the in point from this clip, the out point from this clip, and it's a give and take. So the out point from one gives a little bit of content away to the in point of another. Basically, again, the timing stays the same overall, but the in and out point of two side-by-side clips is what's adjusted. I would continue to refine this. As I said before, I'm going to do one other thing that I love to do. I'm going to select my regular arrow tool by clicking A on my keyboard. I'm going to go to Modify, Adjust Volume, Apply Fades. And if you remember, Command comma, a long time ago, I got into my editing preferences and I made my default fade duration 2/100ths of a second. So they're very small. They're not noticeable at all. They just help smooth the audio transition from one of these interview clips to the next. Next, we're going to share this file by clicking the share button in the top right-hand corner. And if we wanted to create a file that we could perhaps AirPlay to show some clients, that kind of thing, we would select one of these Apple device presets. Let's go ahead and click 720p. Inside this info window, you could give a description, you could add tags in here, and these are going to travel with that file into the Finder, and there could be potentially you could use it to look this file up later as you exported it. So this is the metadata, and that's kind of important if you really want to kind of keep things organized a little bit. Click the settings button. I always go through here one more time and make sure everything looks okay. In this add to playlist drop down, I'm going to go ahead and choose other so that I can get it to open with QuickTime Player. I need to sort those by name. Now, one thing to point out about sharing to this Apple Devices preset is it does put this file in your iTunes library, so it can be a little bit hard to find sometimes, but it's a quick and easy way to get that file onto your computer and potentially play it back through iTunes or elsewhere.